A man at the peak of his career with a loving wife and a corner office believes he has it all. He thinks the beautiful, ambitious woman in the cubicle outside his door is a conquest, a secret thrill that confirms his power. He whispers, promises to her in hushed tones and stolen moments, never imagining the one person he's betraying isn't just his wife, but the silent architect of his entire world. He's about to make a presentation that he thinks will secure his legacy, but he's not presenting to a board of strangers. He's performing for the woman whose heart he broke, and she's about to give him the performance review of a lifetime. Liam Donovan believed his life was a testament to his own brilliance. At 38, he was the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at Innovatec Global, a titan in the cutthroat world of technology and logistics. Their sleek, glass-encased headquarters in downtown Austin was a modern cathedral, and Liam was one of its high priests. He drove a slate-gray Porsche, wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than most people's rent, and lived in a sprawling minimalist home in the hills with his wife, Josephine. To the outside world, Josephine was the perfect corporate spouse. Graceful, intelligent, and impeccably dressed, she was the beautiful, serene backdrop to Liam's meteoric rise. She ran a small, successful freelance graphic design business from a sun-drenched studio in their home. It was, in Liam's words, a wonderful little hobby that keeps her busy. He'd say this at company dinners with a patronizing smile, patting her hand while accepting accolades for his latest triumph. Josephine would just smile back, a placid, unreadable expression in her deep blue eyes. Their life was a meticulously curated picture of success: dinners with other power couples, weekend trips to Napa charity galas, where Liam would write generous checks and soak in the applause. But lately, the perfection had begun to feel thin, stretched. The silences between them had grown longer, filled only by the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the distant city lights twinkling through their floor-to-ceiling windows. The source of the new distance had a name: Brianna Shaw. Brianna was Liam's new executive assistant hired 6 months ago. She was 26 with sharp green eyes, a mane of fiery red hair, and an ambition that burned hotter than a server farm. She wasn't just efficient, she was practically clairvoyant, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. His coffee was on his desk the moment he arrived, his schedule was optimized to the minute, and his presentations were polished to a mirror shine. "The girl's a miracle worker," Liam had told Josephine one evening, scrolling through emails on his phone while she arranged flowers in a vase. "Finally, someone who operates at my speed. A real asset." Josephine had paused, a white rose in her hand. "That's wonderful, darling. It's good to have a team you can rely on." But soon, relying on her bled into evenings. "We're just hammering out the details for the Oracle pitch, Joe. This project is my baby," he'd say, his voice tinny over the phone. Then the late nights became essential weekend work sessions. Then came the business trips for 2. Josephine wasn't naive. She saw the subtle changes. The second phone that was always kept face down. The scent of a perfume, something musky and bold, so unlike her own light floral fragrance that clung faintly to his suit jacket. The way he'd started dressing with a little more flair, a brighter tie here, a more expensive watch there, like a peacock preening for a new mate. The first concrete piece of evidence arrived innocuously, a credit card statement left on the kitchen island. Liam was usually so careful, but there it was, a charge for $200 at the Velvet Curtain, a notoriously intimate cocktail lounge, on a night he was supposedly working late with his all-male project team. Below it, a charge for a suite at the Hotel St. Clair, a boutique hotel just 10 blocks from their home. Josephine stared at the paper, her heart turning to a block of ice in her chest. It wasn't a scream that rose in her throat, but a cold, terrifying calm. She had known, on some primal level, that this was happening. But seeing the proof, the transactional, sordid details laid out in black and white, changed everything. That evening, Liam came home smelling of victory and expensive scotch. He was euphoric. We nailed it, Joe. The preliminary funding for Project Oracle is approved. Peterson is ecstatic. This is the one. This is what puts me in the running for the C-suite. He swept her into a hug, but his embrace felt foreign, a performance for an audience of one. He was talking about Mr. Peterson, the company's stoic, silver-haired CEO, a man who had been with Innovatec since its inception. Josephine pulled back, forcing a smile. "That's amazing, Liam. I knew you could do it." It was all hands on deck, he continued, loosening his tie. Brianna was a rock star, pulled data RAN models all night. I don't know what I'd do without her. He said her name so easily, so casually. Josephine felt a tremor run through her, but her face remained a mask of serene support. "Well, you should celebrate. You've earned it." "We will," he said, kissing her forehead. It felt like a peck from a stranger. "Big dinner this weekend. I'll make reservations at Perennial." She watched him walk up their floating staircase, his shoulders back the king in his castle. He was so confident, so utterly sure of his world and his place in it. He saw her as a beautiful supportive fixture in that world, a valuable part of the decor, but decor nonetheless. He had no idea that the foundation of his castle was built on sand, and that the woman he saw as a mere hobbyist was the one who held the deed to the entire kingdom. He thought Project Oracle was his masterpiece. He had no clue that the seed of the idea, the core algorithm, hadn't come from his late-night brainstorming sessions. It had come from a dusty old server in a climate-controlled vault from the forgotten files of Innovatec's brilliant reclusive founder, a man Liam had never met, a man named Robert Vance, Josephine's father. She walked into her studio, the credit card statement clutched in her hand. The cool calm was solidifying into something harder, something sharper. Betrayal was a poison, but for Josephine, it was also a catalyst. Liam and his ambitious little secretary thought they were playing a game of corporate chess. They were about to find out they were pawns on a board they didn't even know existed, and the Queen had just decided to make her move. The affair was an open secret on the 42nd floor. Not in words, but in glances. In the way Brianna Shaw's laughter would echo from Liam's office long after the 5 o'clock exodus. In the lingering touches on his arm as she handed him a file. In the shared knowing smirks between junior analysts by the coffee machine. They were discreet, but they were also high on the intoxicating mix of power and secrecy, and it made them careless. Liam felt reborn. The predictable comfort of his marriage to Josephine, which he had once cherished, now felt like a beautifully decorated cage. Josephine was calm, steady, and intelligent, but her world of color palettes and font types seemed quaint compared to the high-stakes battleground of Innovatec. Brianna, on the other hand, spoke his language. She understood the thrill of the deal, the brutal poetry of a hostile takeover, the adrenaline of a looming deadline. "You're a shark, Liam." She'd purred one night, her fingers tracing the lapel of his jacket as they sat in a dark corner of the velvet curtain. "And this whole office is your ocean. They're all just minnows." He'd felt a surge of pride, a validation he didn't realize he'd been craving. Peterson is the old whale, he'd mused, sipping his Macallan 25. He's respected, but he's slow. He doesn't see the future. Project Oracle, that's the future, and he's too cautious to fully embrace it. "Then you need to make him," Brianna said, her green eyes glinting. "Once Oracle launches, your position will be undeniable. You won't just be in the C-suite, you'll be running the whole damn show in 5 years." She was a masterful puppeteer, playing on his ego, stoking his ambition until it was a raging inferno. Their trysts at the Hotel St. Clair were less about passion and more about strategy. They'd spread company reports across the king-sized bed, plotting his ascent, their whispers, a conspiracy against the backdrop of the city skyline. Meanwhile, Josephine began her own quiet war. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She compartmentalized the searing pain in her heart and channeled it into cold, calculated action. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer, but to a man named Gerald. Gerald was a discreet, frighteningly efficient private investigator who had been on her family's payroll for decades. He was a ghost, a man who could procure any information without leaving a ripple. Josephine. His gravelly voice came through her encrypted line. It's been a while. I was sorry to hear about your father. Thank you, Gerald, she said, her voice even. I have a situation. It's personal, and it involves Innovatech. She laid it out. Liam Donovan. Brianna Shaw. She wanted everything. Every email, every text message, every hotel booking, every meeting. She wanted to know who Brianna was, where she came from, and what her real angle was. Consider it done, Gerald said, no judgment in his voice. The usual channels. The usual channels, she confirmed, referring to the secure, untraceable server her father had set up for exactly this kind of sensitive family business. While Gerald worked in the shadows, Josephine maintained the facade. She hosted a dinner party for Liam's team, a celebration for the Project Oracle funding. She was the epitome of the gracious host, smiling at Brianna, complimenting her dress and offering her a glass of Chardonnay. You must be so proud of Liam, Brianna said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. He works so incredibly hard. He lives and breathes this project. Oh, I am, Josephine replied, her eyes meeting Brianna's over the rim of her glass. Liam has always been single-minded when he wants something. It's one of his defining qualities. Brianna's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Did she detect a double meaning? No, she must have imagined it. This was the quiet, artsy wife, the domestic goddess. She was no threat. Liam, oblivious, beamed at them both. My two favorite girls getting along. See, this is what I love. Synergy. The word hung in the air, grotesque and absurd. Later that night, as Liam slept, soundly snoring with the contentment of a man who believed he had the world on a string, Josephine sat in her studio, the glow of her monitor, casting long shadows on the walls. Gerald's first report had come in. It was thorough. It contained photos of Liam and Brianna kissing in the hotel elevator, transcripts of text messages filled with corporate plotting and sickening pet names. But it was the file on Brianna that made Josephine's blood run cold. Brianna Shaw wasn't just an ambitious secretary. Before joining Innovatech, she had a 6-month stint at a smaller tech firm, a direct competitor named Omnicore Dynamics. She had left under a cloud of suspicion after a major project proposal was leaked, but nothing was ever proven. And most damningly, Gerald's financial trace had found a series of anonymous lump-sum payments into an offshore account under Brianna's mother's name, originating from a shell corporation linked back to Omnicore. The betrayal was deeper than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just an affair, it was corporate espionage. Liam, in his arrogant blindness and desperate need for validation, was being played. He was so focused on his own ascent that he couldn't see the viper coiling at his feet. Brianna wasn't just his mistress, she was a Trojan horse, and Project Oracle Liam's legacy. The future of Innovatech was the prize she was there to steal from within. Josephine closed her laptop. The pain was still there, a dull, heavy ache behind her ribs. But now it was accompanied by a white-hot rage. Liam's infidelity was a deep personal wound. This was an attack on her father's legacy, and that was a line that should never have been crossed. She looked at a framed photo on her desk. It was of her and her father, Robert Vance, standing on the empty plot of land where the Innovatec headquarters would one day stand. He was a strange, brilliant man who hated the spotlight but loved the pure, elegant logic of creation. Always protect the company, Josie, he used to tell her. It's more than just a business. It's an idea. And ideas are the only things that truly last. Liam had not only broken his vows to her, he had, through his weakness and vanity, put her father's idea at risk. He thought he was climbing a ladder. Josephine would make sure the fall was something he would never forget. To understand Josephine's power, one had to understand her father. Robert Vance was a phantom in the tech world, a genius programmer who built the foundational code for Innovatec. In his garage, he had a pathological aversion to the public eye. He hated board meetings, shareholder calls, and press conferences, so he structured his empire accordingly. He created a holding company, the Vance Trust, which held 51% of Innovatec Global's voting shares. The trust was governed by a single anonymous chairperson, him. To the world, the day-to-day operations were run by the CEO, Daniel Peterson, a man Robert had trusted implicitly. But all major strategic decisions were approved silently by the invisible majority shareholder. When Robert passed away from a sudden illness 2 years ago, the chairmanship of the Vance Trust passed to his sole heir, Josephine. It was his final, most carefully guarded secret. His will stipulated that her identity as chairperson remain confidential unless she chose to reveal it. Find a partner who loves Josephine Donovan. The artist his letter to her had read, not Josephine Vance, the heiress. Let them build a life with you, not with my money. Then when you know their heart is true, you can share the burden of my legacy. Liam had failed the test in the most spectacular way possible. With Gerald's intel painting a grim picture of corporate espionage, Josephine's mission shifted. The cheating husband was one problem. The imminent theft of Innovatec's most valuable intellectual property was another. She had to move carefully, not just as a scorned wife, but as the guardian of a billion-dollar company. Her next call was to Daniel Peterson. They met not at the Innovatec Tower, but at a quiet, dusty old library on the outskirts of the city, a place her father had loved. Peterson was in his late 60s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a mind as sharp as a shard of silicon. He was one of the few people on earth who knew her secret. "Josephine," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've been expecting your call. I have my own concerns about the Oracle team." She slid a sleek encrypted tablet across the polished oak table. "It's worse than you think, Daniel." For the next hour, Peterson scrolled through Gerald's findings. He saw the financial records, the employment history, the surveillance photos. His expression grew progressively grimmer. When he got to the evidence of Brianna's communications with a known Omnicore executive, he let out a long, weary sigh. "Donovan," he said, shaking his head. "I always knew he was arrogant, but I never thought he was a fool. His ego is his blind spot." Josephine said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Brianna found it, and she is exploiting it perfectly. He's so desperate to prove he's the next big thing that he's handing her the keys to the kingdom." "Project Oracle is revolutionary," Peterson said. "The predictive logistics algorithm is decades ahead of anything Omnicore has. If they get their hands on the source code before launch, they could gut us," Josephine finished. "They could patent a modified version and tie us up in litigation for years, all while beating us to market. It wouldn't just be a financial loss, it would be an extinction-level event for our market position." Peterson looked at her, his respect for her evident. She had her father's analytical mind, his ability to see the whole board. "What do you want to do?" "I can have security escort them both out of the building this afternoon. We can begin legal proceedings immediately." Josephine held up a hand. "No. That's too clean. Brianna is a symptom. The disease is the corporate culture that allowed a man like Liam to rise so high so fast without proper oversight, and Omnicore will just send another mole. Firing her now shows our hand. They'll know we're on to them. So we let them continue," Peterson asked, bewildered. "We let them think they are continuing," she corrected. "We let them get closer to the finish line. We let Liam walk right up to the edge of the cliff, believing he's about to fly." The annual shareholders' meeting is in 3 weeks. Liam is scheduled to be the keynote speaker to unveil Oracle to the world. A slow understanding dawned on Peterson's face. "You want to do it publicly. I want to make an example of them." Josephine stated, her blue eyes as cold as a winter sky. "I want every employee, every shareholder, and every one of our competitors to understand what happens when you try to undermine this company, when you try to destroy my father's legacy." Her plan was audacious. They would create a quarantined, dummy version of the Oracle source code, fully functional on the surface, but worthless and embedded with a digital tracker. Under the guise of enhanced security protocols, Peterson would ensure that was the version Brianna would ultimately access and steal. They would let her pass it to Omnicore. They would let Omnicore celebrate their perceived victory. Meanwhile, Liam would continue to be groomed for his big moment in the spotlight, completely unaware that his entire project had been compromised by his mistress and that his wife was orchestrating his downfall. "He's planning to ask for a vote of no confidence in me at the meeting," Peterson added grimly. "He's been quietly lobbying board members. He thinks the success of Oracle will give him the leverage he needs to oust me and take the CEO position." Josephine almost smiled. It was a cruel, humorless expression. "Oh, that's perfect. His ambition will be the rope. Let him have his moment. Let him stand on that stage and give the speech of his life." She stood up, her silhouette framed against a tall stained glass window. 3 weeks, Daniel. Let them have their fantasy for 3 more weeks. Then I'm burning it all to the ground. As Peterson watched her leave, he saw not the quiet, grieving daughter he had comforted 2 years ago, but the true heir to Robert Vance. The company was in good hands. The storm was coming to Innovatec, and he knew with absolute certainty that when the rain cleared, the landscape of the 42nd floor would be changed forever. The 3 weeks leading up to the shareholders' meeting were a masterclass in deception. For Liam, they were the most exhilarating of his life. He felt untouchable, a titan on the verge of apotheosis. He and Brianna grew bolder their affair, a heady cocktail of risk and reward. They celebrated their impending triumph with expensive dinners and stolen nights, toasting with champagne to the future. Peterson has no idea what's coming. Liam gloated one evening lying back on the silk sheets of their usual hotel room. He's a relic. At the meeting after I unveil Oracle, I'll talk about the need for new vision and dynamic leadership. I've got 4 of the 9 board members in my pocket. The success of the launch will swing the rest. Brianna, tracing patterns on his bare chest, smiled. "And when you're CEO, what will I be? Whatever you want," he said magnanimously. "Vice President of Operations, Chief Strategy Officer. You've earned it. We built this together." He truly believed it. He was so blinded by his own reflection in her admiring eyes that he couldn't see the calculating chill behind them. While Liam was planning his coup, Brianna was executing hers. As Josephine and Peterson predicted, the new security protocols around Project Oracle created the perfect opportunity. Brianna, citing the need to prepare Liam's keynote, requested access to the final codebase to pull performance metrics. She was given access to the sandboxed dummy server. To her, it looked like the real thing, a digital fortress. She worked late one night, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Using a sophisticated data exfiltration device disguised as a USB charger, she copied the entire repository. It took hours. Every footstep in the hallway outside made her jump. But by 3 a.m., it was done. She had it, the crown jewels of Innovatec. She sent a single coded text message to her contact at Omnicore. The package is secure. The reply was instantaneous. The transfer will be made upon delivery and verification. Her payday was coming. A 7-figure sum that would allow her to disappear and start a new life far away from Liam Donovan and his petty corporate dramas. She felt a pang of something that might have been guilt, but she crushed it. Liam was a means to an end, a stepping stone. In this world you either ate or were eaten, and Brianna Shaw was a predator. Josephine, from the quiet command center of her home studio, watched it all unfold. Gerald's team had physical surveillance on Brianna and digital trackers on her communications. They saw the late-night data transfer. They watched her meet a shadowy figure in a parking garage to hand off the drive. They saw the massive wire transfer hit the offshore account. Simultaneously, Daniel Peterson was playing his own part to perfection. He appeared weary and resistant to Liam's aggressive project timeline, creating the illusion of a leader out of his depth. Liam, the internal security audits on Oracle aren't complete, he'd argue in management meetings. A launch of this magnitude, we need to be 100% certain. Rushing this could be catastrophic. Liam would counter, full of swagger. Daniel, with all due respect, caution is starting to sound like fear. The market won't wait for us to be 100% certain. We have the momentum. We need to strike now. The board agrees with me. He was walking directly into the snare, so sure of his own genius that he mistook the lack of resistance for weakness on his opponent's part. The night before the shareholders' meeting, Liam and Josephine had a final quiet dinner at home. It was her last test for him, a final flickering hope for the man she had once loved. She cooked his favorite meal, pan-seared scallops with a risotto she'd spent hours on. They ate in near silence, the clinking of their silverware echoing in the vast, empty space of their dining room. "You seem quiet," Liam observed, swirling his wine. "Nervous about tomorrow. I'm always in awe of what you do," she said, her voice soft. It wasn't a lie. She was in awe of his capacity for deceit. "This is the biggest day of your career. Are you ready?" "I was born ready, Joe," he said, with an easy smile. She looked at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Liam, is there anything you want to tell me? Anything at all? Before you stand up on that stage tomorrow, as we sit here in our home. If there's any truth left to be told, now is the time. It was his chance, a life raft, thrown into the churning waters of his lies. He could have confessed. He could have salvaged a single shred of his humanity." He looked back at her, his expression one of mild confusion, perhaps even pity for her perceived fragility. He reached across the table and patted her hand. "Don't worry about a thing," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "Everything is under control. You just worry about picking out a nice dress to wear for the celebration party tomorrow night. You're going to be the wife of the man who saved Innovatec." That was it. The last ember of love for him in Josephine's heart died, turning to cold, hard ash. She slowly pulled her hand back from his. "You're right," she said, her voice a flat, hollow thing. "I should go pick out exactly what I'm going to wear. It's going to be a very memorable day." He beamed, completely missing the chilling finality in her tone. He was a man standing on a trap door, admiring the view just moments before the lever was pulled. The 24 hours before the meeting were a study in contrasts. Liam was a supernova of energy. He spent the morning in a final rehearsal in the main auditorium, a vast state-of-the-art theatre that could seat 2,000 people. He stood on the stage, the Innovatec logo glowing behind him, his voice booming with practiced confidence as he ran through his keynote speech for Brianna and a handful of his sycophantic junior team members. Project Oracle isn't just a new product, he declaimed, arms spread wide. It is a new paradigm. It is the engine that will drive this company into the next century. Brianna watched from the front row, applauding on cue, her face a perfect mask of adoration. Inside, she was counting the hours until she could tender her resignation and vanish. Her bank account was full, her work was done. This was her final performance. Liam felt the power of the moment coursing through him. After the rehearsal, he pulled aside 2 of the board members he'd been courting, David Chen and a stern-faced woman named Sarah Miller. After my presentation, he said in a low conspiratorial tone during the Q&A, "I need you to raise the question of leadership. Frame it around the need for an aggressive, forward-thinking vision to capitalize on Oracle's potential. We can't let this opportunity stagnate under Peterson's timid management." Sarah Miller, a veteran of corporate takeovers, nodded curtly. "The numbers for Oracle better be as good as you claim, Donovan. This move is high risk. If it backfires, you're the one who will burn." "It won't backfire," Liam said, his smile radiating absolute certainty. "Tomorrow I'm not just launching a product. I'm launching a new era for Innovatec." Meanwhile, across town, Josephine's preparations were of a different nature. Her large walk-in closet, usually a serene space of soft fabrics and muted colors, had become a war room. Laid out on the central ottoman was not a celebratory party dress, but a suit. It was a custom-made creation in a shade of deep navy blue that was almost black. The cut was severe, powerful, and unapologetically feminine, a piece of armor crafted from silk and wool. She spent the afternoon on a secure conference call with Daniel Peterson and the company's chief legal counsel, a sharp-witted man named Stephen Cole. They went over the plan one last time, timing every step down to the second. The evidence of Brianna Shaw's espionage is loaded into the presentation deck, hidden behind my keynote, the lawyer confirmed. The tracker in the dummy code showed a successful integration attempt into Omnicore's primary development server at 04:30 this morning. We have them, Josephine. Cold. And the motion to terminate the employment of both Liam Donovan and Brianna Shaw for gross misconduct and conspiracy, she asked, drafted and ready for the board's electronic signature the moment you give the word, Cole replied. "Good," she said. "Daniel, how is the board?" Peterson's voice was steady. "The 4 Liam has swayed are confident. The other 5, including myself, are prepared. They know an unscheduled announcement from the chair of the Vance Trust is forthcoming, but they don't know the details. The shock will be genuine." Her final call was to Gerald. They're celebrating. The investigator reported, his voice a low rasp. "Donovan and Shaw. Bar at the St. Clair. He just bought a bottle of Dom Perignon that costs more than my first car." "Let them," Josephine said, looking at her reflection in the dark glass of her closet doors. "Let them have their last supper." That night, she slept alone in the master bedroom. The house felt cavernous, a hollow monument to a life that was about to be demolished. She didn't feel sadness anymore, or even anger. She felt a profound, unnerving clarity. She was no longer just Josephine Donovan, the freelance designer and betrayed wife. She was becoming someone else, someone she had kept locked away. She was her father's daughter, the protector of his legacy, the silent ruler of an empire. Liam stumbled in well after midnight, reeking of champagne and cheap victory. He didn't come into the bedroom instead, opting to sleep in one of the guest rooms, a small act of discretion that was both pathetic and insulting. Josephine lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house settling. She thought about the vows she had taken with this man, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. He had broken them all. He had chosen poorer, not in wealth, but in character, in loyalty and love. And tomorrow she would give him exactly what he had chosen. She rose before the sun, the sky outside, still a bruised purple. She showered the hot water, washing away the last vestiges of the woman she used to be. She did her makeup with surgical precision, not to be beautiful, but to be imposing. A bold red lip, a stark line of eyeliner. When she put on the navy blue suit, it felt like a second skin. She walked past the guest room where her husband was sleeping off his celebration. She didn't pause. She didn't look back. She walked out of the house she had shared with him, got into the back of a black town car sent by Peterson, and drove towards the glass tower downtown. She was on her way to a shareholders' meeting, but it felt like she was heading to an execution. Her own, in a way. The death of her old life, and the birth of a queen. The Innovatic auditorium was electric. Shareholders, employees, and tech journalists filled every seat, a sea of anticipation. The mood was buoyant, fueled by weeks of carefully leaked hype about Project Oracle. On stage, a massive screen displayed the company logo against a pulsating futuristic background. In the front row, Daniel Peterson sat with the board of directors, his face a neutral, unreadable mask. 2 seats down from him, a single chair remained conspicuously empty. Backstage, Liam Donovan was practically vibrating with adrenaline. He adjusted his custom-made tie, shot his cuffs, and gave Brianna a final conspiratorial wink. She was standing by the entrance tablet in hand, looking every bit the part of the indispensable right hand. "Ready to make history?" He whispered, his voice hoarse with excitement. "They're going to be chanting your name," she whispered back, her smile flawless. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Daniel Peterson walked to the podium. "Good morning," he began, his calm, steady voice filling the auditorium. "Welcome, everyone. We stand today at a pivotal moment for Innovatech Global, a moment of profound innovation, and the man who has spearheaded this leap forward is our own Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, Mr. Liam Donovan." A wave of applause swept through the room as Liam strode onto the stage, a conquering hero. He soaked it in a wide, charismatic smile plastered on his face. He shook Peterson's hand, a gesture he intended to look like the passing of a torch. For the next 45 minutes, Liam was magnificent. He was a master showman, weaving a compelling narrative about the future of logistics, the power of predictive analytics, and the genius of Project Oracle. The presentation was flawless, full of sleek graphics and impressive data projections, all meticulously prepared by Brianna. He was charming, witty, and utterly convincing. "Project Oracle is more than code," he thundered, reaching his crescendo. "It is our promise to our clients, to our partners, and to you, our shareholders, that Innovatech will not just follow the future. We will create it." The auditorium erupted. The applause was deafening. Liam stood, arms outstretched, basking in the raw adoration. This was his moment. He had done it. As the applause began to subside, he transitioned smoothly. "I'd now like to open the floor for questions." As planned, Sarah Miller, the board member, stood up. "Mr. Donovan, a remarkable presentation. But it raises a critical question. A tool this powerful requires bold, aggressive leadership to leverage its full potential. Do you believe our current leadership structure is agile enough to capitalize on the opportunity you've just created? It was the signal, the start of the coup. Liam's smile became predatory. That's an excellent and vital question, Sarah. I believe that for a new era of innovation, we need a new era of leadership. Excuse me. The voice came not from the audience, but from the podium Liam had just vacated. Daniel Peterson was standing there again, his expression now hard as granite. Mr. Donovan, before you answer that question, Peterson said, his voice amplified. Cutting through the murmurs, there is one more presentation. We have a very special guest. For the first time, the chairperson of the Vance Trust, our majority shareholder, has decided to address the company directly. A confused silence fell over the room. The chairperson of the Vance Trust was a myth, a ghost in the machine. No one had ever seen or heard from them. Liam froze, his triumphant smile faltering. What was this? It wasn't on the schedule. Please welcome Peterson, announced his voice, ringing with authority, our chairperson. From the wings of the stage, a figure emerged. A woman in a severe navy blue suit, her heels clicking with quiet, lethal purpose on the stage floor. She walked into the spotlight, her face projected onto the massive screen behind her. It was Josephine. The entire auditorium was plunged into a stunned, disbelieving silence. But no one was more stunned than Liam Donovan. He stared at his wife as if she were an apparition. His mind simply could not process what he was seeing. Josephine, his quiet, artistic wife who ran a little hobby from home. Here he looked wildly from her to Peterson, a sick, dawning horror creeping into his gut. Josephine didn't look at him. Not yet. She walked directly to the podium, her composure absolute. Good morning, she said, her voice calm and clear, yet carrying an unmistakable weight of command that no one in that room had ever heard from her. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Josephine Vance Donovan. My father was Robert Vance. A collective gasp went through the audience. Vance, the legendary founder. As the sole heir to his estate, I am the chairperson of the Vance Trust and the majority shareholder of this company, she continued, her eyes sweeping across the dumbfounded faces of the board members. And I must say, Liam, that was a truly impressive presentation. She finally turned her head and looked at him. The warmth and love he was used to seeing in her eyes were gone, replaced by something glacial and sharp. His blood ran cold. So impressive, she said, that our competitor Omnicore Dynamics must have thought so too when they received a full copy of the source code at 4:30 this morning. The words hit the room like a physical blow. On the giant screen behind her, the Innovatech logo dissolved, replaced by a split screen. On one side, security footage of Brianna Shaw at her desk in the middle of the night, copying files onto a hidden drive. On the other, a copy of the wire transfer confirmation from the Omnicore Shell Corporation to Brianna's offshore account. Brianna, who had been standing by the side of the stage, turned white as a sheet. Her face, projected in high definition, was a mask of pure terror. Liam's world tilted on its axis. He stammered, What is this, Josephine? This is insane. This is some kind of mistake. Oh, it's a mistake, all right, Liam, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. Your first mistake was underestimating your wife. Your second was trusting your mistress. She wasn't trying to build an empire with you. She was selling this one out from under you. The screen changed again. Now it displayed a series of text messages between Liam and Brianna, flirtatious, unprofessional, and damningly conspiratorial, plotting Peterson's ouster. Below it, hotel receipts. Photos of them from Gerald's surveillance. The sordid, ugly truth of their affair was laid bare for 2,000 people to see. Liam looked as if he had been physically struck, gasping for air. He looked at Brianna, his expression a mixture of confusion and betrayal, then back at the ice-cold woman on the stage who wore his wife's face. "But your biggest mistake," Josephine said, her voice, rising again to command the room, was thinking Project Oracle was yours to begin with. The screen changed one last time. It showed a side-by-side comparison of 2 blocks of code. One was the core algorithm of Project Oracle. The other was time-stamped nearly 15 years earlier, a proof-of-concept file from a private server belonging to Robert Vance. They were nearly identical. "My father was the true architect of Oracle," Josephine announced. "You simply found his abandoned blueprints and tried to pass them off as your own masterpiece. You are not a visionary, Liam. You are a plagiarist and a fool." She turned to face the audience, leaving Liam to stew in his public humiliation. "Effective immediately, the employment of Liam Donovan and Brianna Shaw is terminated for gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and conspiracy against this company. Security will now escort them from the premises." As if on cue, 2 large, stone-faced security guards walked onto the stage. One moved towards a paralyzed Brianna. The other approached Liam. Liam finally broke. "Josephine, no, please. We can talk about this. This is my life. You can't do this." He pleaded, his voice, cracking the charismatic leader, dissolving into a pathetic, desperate man. Josephine looked at him one last time, her expression utterly unmoved. "You had a life, Liam. You had a home. You had a wife who loved you. And you burned it all down for a cheap thrill and a corner office you didn't even earn. You have nothing left here." The guard took Liam's arm, and as he was led off the stage past the shocked faces of his colleagues and the flashing cameras of the press, his reign as king, which had lasted less than an hour, was over. The fall was not just from the stage. It was from the stratosphere with no parachute. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The story was a Molotov cocktail thrown into the dry, gossipy world of corporate tech. "CEO's heiress wife exposes cheating husband in shocking takeover," screamed the headlines. Innovatec's stock dipped for approximately 90 minutes before rebounding with a vengeance, soaring to an all-time high as investors rallied behind the decisive and dramatic action taken by its new, visible leader. Josephine Vance Donovan became an overnight legend, a quiet, unassuming woman who revealed herself to be a corporate titan, a queen who had checkmated her enemies in the most public forum imaginable. Liam and Brianna were not just fired, they were ruined. Josephine's legal team descended upon them with the full crushing weight of Innovatec's resources. Brianna, faced with overwhelming evidence of espionage and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, quickly turned on Omnicore Dynamics, providing a full confession in exchange for a plea deal. The ensuing lawsuit effectively crippled Omnicore, forcing them into a fire sale of their assets, many of which were strategically acquired by a newly aggressive Innovatec. For Liam, there was no deal to be made. He was publicly disgraced, a pariah in the industry he had so desperately wanted to conquer. The board members who had supported his coup attempt backpedaled furiously, pledging their unwavering loyalty to Josephine. He lost his job, his reputation, and his friends, who vanished like mist in the morning sun. Their final confrontation took place not in a boardroom, but in the sterile, soulless office of their divorce lawyers a few weeks later. Liam looked like a ghost. He had lost weight, his expensive suit hung on him, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. "Why, Joe?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why do it like that? Why destroy me?" Josephine sat opposite him, calm and composed. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a prenuptial agreement, one he had insisted upon when they got married. He had wanted to protect his future earnings from her. It was a simple ironclad document stating that what was his, and what was hers was hers. He had signed it with a smug grin years ago, never imagining the sheer scale of what was hers. "You're asking the wrong question, Liam," she said, her voice even. "You shouldn't be asking why I destroyed you. You should be asking why I ever gave you the chance to build yourself up in the first place. I loved you. I believed in the man I married. I kept the most important part of my life a secret because I wanted your love to be real, not a transaction. I wanted a partner, not a sycophant." She leaned forward slightly. "You ask why I did it publicly, because your betrayal wasn't just private. You didn't just cheat on your wife. You endangered the livelihoods of the 10,000 employees of this company. You compromised the legacy my father spent his life building." That required a public response. It required a clear, unequivocal statement that Innovatec is not a playground for ambitious, egotistical men to risk for their own vanity. He had no answer. He just stared at the document, the monument to his own spectacular hubris. He would walk away with nothing but his own assets, a sports car he could no longer afford the insurance on, and a bank account that would soon be drained by legal fees. He had flown so close to the sun, and now he was nothing but melted wax and feathers. Josephine stood up, her part in this conversation over. "I wish you well, Liam," she said, and the tragedy was a small part of her, almost meant it. She wished him the kind of peace that comes from self-awareness, though she doubted he would ever find it. She walked out of the lawyer's office and into the bright Austin sunlight. A car was waiting for her, not the town car of a secret heiress, but the official company vehicle of the chairperson of Innovatec Global. Daniel Peterson was in the passenger seat. "Where to, Madame Chair?" the driver asked. Josephine looked at the glass tower of her company, gleaming against the blue sky. She had never wanted this life. She had never asked for this power. But it was hers. The gilded cage was gone, and in its place was a kingdom. Her kingdom. She had been betrayed, but she had not been broken. She had emerged from the fire, not scorched, but forged. "Back to the office, Daniel," she said, a faint, determined smile touching her lips for the first time in months. "We have an empire to run." And that's the story of how a man who thought he had everything lost it all because he failed to see the true worth of the woman beside him. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most powerful, and that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. Liam's world was built on a foundation of lies and ego, and it crumbled the moment the truth came to light. Josephine, on the other hand, built her victory on integrity, intelligence, and the strength she found in the face of betrayal. What did you think of Josephine's ultimate revenge? Was it justice, or was it too harsh? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of drama and deception, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good tale of comeuppance, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening. The air in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was thick with the scent of money and gardenias. For Charlotte Clayworth, it smelled like a beautiful cage. Tonight was the annual Metropolitan Legacy Ball, the glittering apex of New York's philanthropic scene. But as her billionaire husband Garrett laughed with his associates, his hand resting just a little too long on the back of a woman in a crimson dress Charlotte knew the night would end in ash. She felt the weight of the 1,000 gazes in the room, the sympathetic glances, the cruel whispers. They all saw her as the quiet, unassuming wife. They were all about to witness her utter humiliation. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the woman they pitied was about to become the predator they feared. The chandeliers of the Pierre dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light on the city's elite. Charlotte Clayworth stood slightly behind her husband, a practiced position she had perfected over a decade of marriage. She was a ghost in Chanel, her pearl grey gown, chosen to complement, never to command. It was a role she played with Oscar-worthy dedication, the supportive, elegant, and utterly forgettable wife of Garrett Clayworth, the magnate whose company Zenith Corp was swallowing the tech world whole. Garrett was in his element, a lion holding court. His voice, a low baritone that could charm senators and crush competitors, boomed across their small circle. And at the center of that circle, radiating a heat that felt almost vulgar in the opulent room, was Bianca Devereaux. Bianca was everything Charlotte was not. Her dress was a slash of crimson silk that clung to her like a second skin. Her laughter was loud and throaty. Her eyes, a startling shade of emerald green, were fixed on Garrett with an adoration so blatant it was an act of aggression. She was the head of acquisitions for a rival firm, but everyone knew her true ambition was the acquisition of a Clayworth. "Charlotte, darling, you're so quiet tonight," Bianca purred, turning her dazzling smile on her. It didn't reach her eyes. "You must be so proud of Garrett. The aerodynamic deal is going to be legendary." Charlotte offered a small, practiced smile. "I'm always proud of my husband's work." The words felt like dust in her mouth. The aerodynamic deal was Garrett's magnum opus, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would cement Zenith Corp's dominance for the next generation. It was all he spoke about, all he worked on. It was also, Charlotte knew, the primary reason he and Bianca were spending so many late nights at the office. Garrett, oblivious or uncaring, beamed. He draped an arm around Bianca's shoulders, a gesture of casual ownership that sent a fresh wave of whispers rippling through the onlookers. "Bianca has been instrumental. Her insights are invaluable." The subtext was a sledgehammer. Charlotte felt a familiar coldness seep into her bones, a practiced detachment she had honed as a survival mechanism. She focused on the weight of the Clayworth diamond, a monstrous 50-carat canary stone on her neck. It was her anniversary gift. It felt less like a jewel and more like a beautifully crafted yoke. The moment of detonation came with the precision of a controlled demolition. A waiter, young and nervous, stumbled near their circle, jostling Bianca. A few drops of champagne splashed onto the sleeve of Garrett's custom tuxedo. "Oh, you clumsy oaf!" Bianca shrieked, her carefully constructed mask of charm vanishing. Before the mortified waiter could even stammer an apology, Garrett was dabbing at his sleeve with a napkin. "It's nothing, Bianca, relax." But Bianca saw her opening. She turned to Charlotte, her voice dripping with a venomous sweetness that was louder than any shout. "You see, this is what I mean. Things get messy. You need someone who isn't afraid to handle the mess, who isn't just decorative." She looked pointedly at Charlotte's serene posture. "The future requires a partner, not just a placeholder." The silence that fell around them was absolute. It was a social grenade, and Bianca had pulled the pin with relish. Every eye was on Charlotte. They were waiting for the tears, the hurried exit, the dignified crumbling that was expected of the wronged wife. Garrett, finally sensing he'd let the leash go too far, tried to intervene. "Bianca, that's enough." But Bianca wasn't done. She took a step closer to Charlotte, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was intentionally audible to everyone nearby. "Don't worry, Charlotte. I'll take good care of him, and of Zenith Corp. A woman like you isn't built for that kind of pressure anyway. You should stick to charities and luncheons." She then reached out, and with a single perfectly manicured finger, tapped the Clayworth diamond. "This is beautiful, but it's just a stone. I'm after the entire mine." It was a declaration of war, a public, brutal, and utterly humiliating one. Charlotte didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply met Bianca's triumphant gaze. For a fraction of a second, the placid mask slipped, and Bianca saw something in Charlotte's deep blue eyes that wasn't there before a flicker of Arctic cold, a glint of something ancient and predatory. It was so unexpected that Bianca actually took a half step back. Then the mask was back in place. Charlotte turned her gaze to her husband. Garrett had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but it was the shame of a man caught playing with a shiny new toy, not the remorse of a man who had just shattered his wife's dignity. "Are you finished?" Charlotte's voice was quiet, yet it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "Charlie, let's not do this here," Garrett mumbled, trying to take her arm. She pulled away a small, definitive movement. "No, you're right. This isn't the place." She looked around at the sea of curious, pitying faces. The Sinclairs, the Vanderbilts, the Barclays. They were all witnesses. Good. She wanted them to remember this moment. Without another word, Charlotte Clayworth turned and walked away. She didn't run. Her back was straight, her steps measured. She glided through the crowd, a grey ghost leaving the scene of her own execution. As she passed the grand entrance, she handed the valet her ticket, not for the black Bentley her husband would be taking, but for the nondescript sedan registered under a name no one in this room would ever recognize. The entire ballroom watched her go. Garrett was left standing with a smug Bianca on his arm, the victor claiming her prize. They and everyone else in that room believed they had just seen the end of Charlotte Clayworth. They had no idea they had just witnessed the beginning. The drive from the Pierre to the Upper West Side was a blur of city lights, painting fleeting streaks across the tinted windows of the Lexus sedan. Charlotte didn't see them. Her gaze was fixed inward, replaying the scene at the gala not with pain, but with the dispassionate analysis of a general reviewing battle footage. The public humiliation wasn't a wound. It was a trigger. The final protocol in a contingency plan she had been quietly building for years. Her destination was not the palatial Fifth Avenue penthouse she shared with Garrett. That was his home, a gilded stage for his life. Her destination was a modest, pre-war brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street, a property owned by a shell corporation so deeply buried it was practically at the Earth's core. She let herself in with a key, the click of the lock echoing in the silent foyer. The air inside was different. It smelled of old books and ozone from electronics, not of Garrett's cologne and Bianca's cloying perfume. This was her sanctuary, her headquarters. She walked past the sparsely furnished living room and into a back office that was anything but modest. 3 monitors glowed with streams of code and market data. A server rack hummed quietly in a ventilated closet. This was the cockpit of her real life. She took off the Clayworth diamond and set it on the desk. Under the cool LED light of the monitors, the magnificent stone looked garish, a vulgar piece of glass. She unzipped the Chanel gown, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin, and changed into a simple black turtleneck and jeans. She was no longer Charlotte Clayworth, the billionaire's wife. Here she was, someone else, entirely. She sat down and typed a short, encrypted message on a dedicated terminal. K-Phase 2 is a go. Execute. Almost instantly a reply appeared. D acknowledged. Are you all right? The sender was Mr. Davies, a man whose name was as unassuming as his appearance. To the world, he was a semi-retired estate lawyer. In reality, he was the only other person on earth who knew Charlotte's secret. He was her legal architect, her loyal sentinel, the man who had helped her build her invisible empire. I'm operational. The trigger condition was met. Publicly, with witnesses. I'm sorry it came to that. Don't be. It was necessary. Ambiguity is a liability. He made it clean. Now so will I. She leaned back, her fingers tapping a silent rhythm on the cold metal desk. For 10 years, she had lived a double life. When she met Garrett, she was already on the cusp of creating something extraordinary. She was a brilliant, self-taught coder and a savant of predictive analytics. While he was building his empire in steel and silicon, she was building hers in the ether. She was the anonymous creator of Aura, a revolutionary data analytics platform. Aura wasn't just fast, it was practically prescient. It could analyze vast, unstructured datasets, market trends, geopolitical shifts, social media sentiment, even meteorological patterns, and predict market movements with an uncanny 94% accuracy. She had deployed it under the pseudonym Helios, a name whispered with awe in the most exclusive circles of hedge funds and private equity. Helios was a ghost, a myth, a legend who had made a handful of early investors astronomically wealthy before closing the fund to new money. Those early investors had paid her not in cash, but in equity, in favors in untraceable ownership of subsidiary companies. Charlotte Helios had quietly become a secret millionaire, then a secret 100-millionaire, all while the world saw her as nothing more than Garrett Clayworth's pretty, silent wife. She had kept her secret for one reason: she had, for a time, loved him. She believed in the dream he sold her of a partnership. But she had seen the shift in him as his wealth and power grew. His ambition curdled into arrogance, his confidence into cruelty. He began to see her not as his partner, but as his prettiest asset, an accessory to his success. So she prepared. She built her fortress of solitude and silence, brick by digital brick, waiting for the day she would inevitably need it. Tonight was that day. Garrett, she knew, would be trying to call her. He would assume she had fled to her parents' home in Connecticut or to a friend's apartment to weep. He would be preparing a speech, a mix of half-hearted apology and stern admonishment about causing a scene. He would offer to buy her another piece of jewelry to smooth things over. He still believed he was in control. He was operating on an old map, unaware that the entire landscape had been redrawn around him. A new message from Davies appeared on the screen. "The Elysian Ventures is ready. The board is ours. We have the controlling interest in all 3 of the shell companies that hold aerodynamics key patents." Charlotte allowed herself a small, cold smile. Elysian Ventures was her primary holding company, the public face of Helios's, investments run by a CEO she'd hand-picked who had no idea who he truly worked for, and Garrett's legendary aerodynamic deal. He was buying a beautiful, expensive car without realizing Charlotte's companies owned the patents for the engine, the transmission, and the wheels. He was about to pay a premium for a hollow shell, and he didn't even know it. Good. What about our other project, the Devereaux file? D. The dossier is complete. Her entire life is a fabrication, the art history degree from the Sorbonne. The university has no record of her, the family money from a Swiss banking dynasty. Her father was a high school gym teacher in Ohio. She has a mountain of debt hidden across 6 credit cards and 2 personal loans. She's not a shark, Charlotte. She's a remora looking for a host. This was the second prong of her attack. While Garrett was focused on business, Bianca was focused on social currency. Charlotte was about to bankrupt her in that market too. She looked at the third monitor, which displayed a live feed of Zenith Corp's stock price. It was stable strong. It was the symbol of Garrett's power, his ego made manifest in a ticker symbol. "You built your house on a fault line, Garrett," she whispered to the empty room. "You just never knew who was standing on the tectonic plate." She typed one final command to Davies. Begin the whisper campaign on Devereaux. Anonymous tip to page 6 and the Wall Street Journal's society columnist. Leak the education discrepancy first. Let's see how she handles pressure when it's real. Consider it done. The quake begins tomorrow at 9 a.m. Charlotte shut down the terminal. For the first time all night she felt a sense of calm. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. This was a correction. A rebalancing of an equation that had been skewed for far too long. She had been silent for 10 years, gathering power, observing, calculating. Now the silence was over. It was time for the storm. The next morning the city awoke to the usual chaos of a Monday. For Garrett Clayworth it began with a mild headache and a growing annoyance. Charlotte hadn't come home. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He had left her 4 messages, each one shifting in tone, from feigned concern to outright irritation. He stood in his penthouse office, overlooking Central Park, a cup of coffee in his hand. Paul, his anxious chief of staff, was giving him the morning brief. "And the final papers for the aerodynamic acquisition are ready for your signature, Mr. Clayworth. The wire transfer is scheduled for Wednesday. It's a clean deal. Kendrick over at Omnicorp is going to be kicking himself for missing this." Good. Garrett grunted his mind elsewhere. He was more concerned with the social fallout from the gala. He'd have to send a massive donation to the museum to smooth things over, maybe issue a quiet apology to the board. The thought of having to manage Charlotte's feelings was the most irritating part. She was supposed to be the easy part of his life. "Anything else?" Garrett asked, impatient. Paul hesitated. "Well, sir, there is one small thing. A gossip piece. Page 6 online." He slid a tablet across the marble desk. The headline was, "Salacious Society Clamours Ivy League Lies. Questions arise about Bianca Devereaux's gilded past." Garrett's eyes narrowed as he read. The article was short, but sharp, citing an anonymous source who claimed Bianca's much-touted degree from the Sorbonne in Paris was a complete fiction. It was carefully worded, filled with questions rather than accusations, but the damage was done. In their world, the suggestion of fraud was as damning as a conviction. "Who the hell would leak this?" Garrett snapped, slamming the tablet down. "This is a nuisance." "We don't know, sir. It seems to have come out of nowhere." Garrett immediately thought of a jealous rival of Bianca's, or perhaps Charlotte in a petty, pathetic act of revenge. He dismissed the thought. Charlotte didn't have the spine or the connections for something like this. It was probably just gossip-mongering. He spent the rest of the morning on the phone with a furious Bianca, reassuring her that it was nothing that he would have his PR team kill the story. But the story wasn't dying. By lunchtime, the Wall Street Journal's society blog had picked it up, adding another detail from a trusted source, whispers of significant personal debt. The narrative was shifting. Bianca was no longer the brilliant homewrecker. She was being painted as a desperate grifter. It complicated the optics of Garrett's affair, making him look not like a powerful man, taking what he wanted, but like a fool being played. Meanwhile, across town, in her anonymous brownstone, Charlotte watched the story spread with clinical detachment. The leak was a small, precise scalpel, cut designed to bleed Bianca's social capital dry. But it was just a diversion. The main event was happening in the silent, invisible world of high finance. Her focus was on the aerodynamic deal. For the past 6 months, Garrett had been pursuing the acquisition with single-minded obsession. Aerodynamic held patents for next-generation drone propulsion and guidance systems that would revolutionize logistics and shipping Zenith Corp's fastest-growing sector. The deal would make Zenith untouchable. Garrett, for all his bluster, was a brilliant but conventional businessman. He saw assets and liabilities, market share and profit margins. Charlotte saw the system beneath the system. She saw the tangled web of intellectual property rights. Years ago, through Elysian Ventures, Helios had identified 3 small obscure tech labs, one in Tel Aviv, one in Stuttgart, and one in a university incubator in California. Each was working on a piece of a puzzle. None of them knew about the others. Charlotte's firm acquired a majority stake in all 3, providing them with funding and resources, but instructing them to remain independent and under the radar. These labs, not aerodynamic, had filed the foundational patents for the very technology that made Aerodynamic's products work. Aerodynamic had simply licensed the technology through a complex series of agreements that contained a very specific and very expensive change of control clause. Garrett's legion of high-priced lawyers at the prestigious firm of Cromwell and Swain had reviewed the deal. They had seen the licensing agreements, but they had registered them as a minor liability, a standard cost of doing business. They had no idea that the 3 seemingly separate licenses were all controlled by a single hidden entity. They had no idea that the change of control clause meant that upon Zenith Corp's acquisition of Aerodynamic, the licensing fees for the core technology would increase by a staggering 2,000%, payable immediately to the parent company of the 3 labs' Elysian Ventures. Garrett was about to pay $4.3 billion for a company whose core operational costs would instantly balloon by an extra $500 million a year, effectively rendering the acquisition unprofitable for the first decade. He was buying a trophy, and Charlotte was about to present him with the bill. Mr. Davies's voice came through the secure speakerphone. The Board of Aerodynamic has just received our official notification as per the terms of the licensing agreement, sir. We've informed them that upon the finalization of the sale to Zenith Corp, the new fee structure will be implemented. And their reaction? Charlotte asked, watching the Zenith ticker. Panic would be an understatement. Their CAO is trying to call Garrett now. The Cromwell and Swain lawyers are scrambling. They're realizing they've walked their client into a bear trap. Charlotte looked at the Clayworth diamond still sitting on her desk. Garrett had bought it for her, as a symbol of his power and her value. He was about to learn a brutal lesson about valuation. Garrett values strength above all else, Davies. Charlotte said, her voice calm. He despises weakness. He saw my quietness as weakness, my support as subservience. He never once thought to look under the hood. He never once asked what I did all day while he was building his empire. She had spent her days building a better one, an invisible one, an empire that was about to bring his to its knees. The secure line to Garrett's office, a line only his chief of staff could use to reach him, would be ringing any second now. The first tremor of the earthquake was about to hit his perfect ordered world. He would be confused. He would be angry, but he still wouldn't suspect her. To him, she was still just Charlotte, the ghost in his machine. The call came not from Aerodynamic's CEO, but from a senior partner at Cromwell and Swain, his voice tight with panic. Garrett listened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his phone. He barked questions, his voice rising with each answer. When he finally slammed the phone down, the silence in his office was deafening. "What is Elysian Ventures?" he roared at Paul. "Get me everything you have on them. Now." Paul, already pale, fumbled with his tablet. "They're a private equity firm, sir. Highly secretive. very successful. They're known for making strategic early-stage investments in deep tech. Their founder is anonymous. They operate under a pseudonym, Helios. The name meant nothing to Garrett. Anonymous? In my world, nobody is anonymous. Find out who is behind it. I want a name, and get their CEO on the line. I don't care what you have to do. For the next 24 hours, Zenith Corp was a hive of frantic activity. Garrett's lawyers worked around the clock, poring over the licensing agreements they had previously dismissed, searching for a loophole, a weakness. They found none. The contracts were ironclad masterpieces of legal architecture. Garrett's attempts to reach the CEO of Elysian Ventures were met with a polite but impenetrable wall of executive assistants and lawyers. He was being stonewalled, a tactic he himself had perfected, and it was driving him into a rage. The $4.3 billion acquisition was suddenly a poisoned chalice. If he pulled out now, Zenith would face massive penalty fees, and his reputation would be shattered. If he went through with it, he would be saddling his company with a parasitic liability that would drain it for years. He was trapped. While Garrett was fighting a war on the financial front, his personal life was also beginning to unravel. The stories about Bianca Devereaux were no longer confined to gossip columns. A respected financial journal published a think piece titled "The Perils of Personal Due Diligence," using Bianca's case as a prime example of how high-level executives could be blinded by personal relationships, subtly questioning Garrett's judgment. Her professional credibility was evaporating, and the stain was spreading to him. Bianca was not handling the pressure well. Her calls to Garrett became more frequent, more hysterical. She accused him of not doing enough to protect her, of letting his pathetic wife run a smear campaign. This has Charlotte's fingerprints all over it. She shrieked over the phone during one of their increasingly fraught conversations. It's the kind of petty, underhanded thing a weak woman would do. Charlotte doesn't have the guts or the brains for this Bianca. Garrett snapped back, his patience worn thin. She's probably hiding at some spa, crying into a flute of champagne. This is a corporate attack, nothing more. He truly believed it. In his mind, the two events, the crisis with the aerodynamic deal and Bianca's public implosion, were unrelated. The world was a big, hostile place. He had enemies. The idea that the source of both attacks could be the quiet woman who organized his sock drawer was simply beyond the realm of his imagination. Charlotte monitored his escalating panic from her command center. She saw the frantic trading of Zenith stock as rumors of a snag in the deal began to leak. She read the internal reports from her sources inside Cromwell & Swain, detailing the desperation of Garrett's legal team. It was all proceeding exactly as she had designed. The time had come for the second strike. It was a move designed not to cripple but to confuse and demoralize her enemy. Through a series of encrypted channels, Elysian Ventures sent a formal offer directly to the board of Zenith Corp. The offer was not hostile. On the surface, it was incredibly generous. Elysian Ventures offered to buy out the toxic licensing agreements from Aerodynamic. They would then renegotiate a new, long-term contract with Zenith Corp at a much more reasonable, though still profitable rate. In exchange for this rescue, Elysian Ventures asked for a small, seemingly insignificant concession, 2 seats on Zenith Corp's board of directors, and a 15% stake in the company to be purchased at a premium over the current market value. To Garrett's beleaguered board, the offer looked like a lifeline. They saw a way out of a catastrophic deal, a way to save face and stabilize the company. They would be giving up a small amount of equity and 2 board seats, but they would be avoiding financial ruin. To them, Elysian Ventures Helios looked like a white knight. Mr. Davies called Charlotte as soon as the offer was sent. The board will pressure him to accept Charlotte. They'll see it as the only prudent move. I know, Charlotte replied calmly. And Garrett will hate it. He's an emperor. He doesn't accept help, and he certainly doesn't give up pieces of his empire no matter how small. He'll see it as a sign of weakness. So what's the purpose of the offer? The purpose is to sow dissent, Charlotte explained. It will turn his own board against him. They will see him as emotional and irrational for refusing a deal that saves the company. And when he's busy fighting a civil war inside his own boardroom, he'll be distracted. He won't see the next move coming. The offer from Elysian Ventures did exactly what Charlotte predicted. It split the Zenith board. The older, more conservative members saw it as a godsend. The younger members loyal to Garrett saw it as a Trojan horse. The boardroom, once Garrett's personal fiefdom, became a battlefield of competing interests. His authority for the first time in his career was being openly questioned. He was surrounded by enemies, real and perceived. He was lashing out at his lawyers, his board members, and at Bianca, whose presence had become a liability he could no longer afford. In a cold, brief meeting at a neutral hotel bar, he ended their affair. He told her she was a distraction, that the negative press she had attracted was unprofessional. He gave her a check, a severance package for services rendered, and walked away, leaving her utterly stunned and alone. Bianca, stripped of her powerful protector, and her fabricated reputation, was left with nothing but her very real debts. Her career was in tatters. She had gambled everything on Garrett and lost. Garrett felt a grim satisfaction at cutting her loose. It was one problem at least that he could solve. He retreated to his penthouse, pouring a stiff scotch, feeling the walls of his empire closing in. The aerodynamic deal was in flames, his board was in rebellion, and his mistress was a public disgrace. And he still had no idea where his wife was. He was beginning to feel a flicker of a new emotion, something other than irritation. It was a cold, creeping dread. The silence from Charlotte's corner of his life was no longer a sign of peace. It was starting to feel like the eerie calm at the eye of a hurricane. He was fighting a multi-front war, bleeding capital and credibility, and the one person who should have been by his side had simply vanished. The foundation of his world was cracking, and he had no idea that the architect of his ruin was the very person he had sworn to protect, the person he had dismissed as nothing more than a beautiful decoration. The next 2 weeks were a slow-motion demolition of Garrett Clayworth's world. His refusal of Elysian Ventures' rescue offer was seen by the market as pure hubris. Financial analysts who once sang his praises now wrote scathing columns about his ego, jeopardizing shareholder value. Zenith Corp's stock price, once a proud monolith, began a steady, sickening slide. He became a recluse in his own company, striding through the halls with a thunderous expression, speaking only in clipped, angry commands. His legendary charm had vanished, replaced by a raw, paranoid fury. He ordered his security team to run deep background checks on every member of his board, convinced one of them was feeding information to Helios. The trust that had bound his inner circle together was dissolving into suspicion and fear. Charlotte watched it all unfold from a distance, her strategy playing out with the chilling precision of a chess grandmaster cornering a king. She was systematically dismantling his pillars of support, his board, the market, his mistress, and finally his self-perception. With Bianca neutralized and the Zenith board in turmoil, it was time for the next phase. This part of the plan was not about financial ruin, but about psychological warfare. It was designed to unravel the man, not just the CEO. Mr. Davies had over the years compiled a second dossier, one that had nothing to do with business. It was about Garrett. It contained every quiet indiscretion, every undeclared gift, every instance he had used the company's private jet for personal trips with Bianca, every lavish dinner charged to a Zenith Corp expense account. Individually, they were minor infractions, but woven together, they painted a damning portrait of a CEO who treated his publicly traded company like a personal piggy bank. "The board has a fiduciary duty," Charlotte told Davies over their secure line. "They can overlook an affair, but they cannot overlook the blatant misuse of corporate funds. It exposes them all to shareholder lawsuits." "When do we deploy it?" Davies asked. "Not yet," Charlotte said. "He needs to feel completely isolated first. He needs to believe he has no one left to turn to." Her opportunity came in the form of Paul Garrett's beleaguered chief of staff. Paul had been with Garrett for 15 years, a loyal soldier who had weathered every storm. But Garrett's paranoia had finally turned on him. In a fit of rage over a minor scheduling error, Garrett had publicly humiliated Paul in front of half the executive team, accusing him of incompetence and even disloyalty. That evening, Paul received an anonymous encrypted email. It contained no threats, no demands. It simply contained a single high-resolution photograph. The photo was of Paul's daughter, a promising medical student, standing outside her university library. The metadata on the photo was intact, showing it had been taken that very afternoon. A second email arrived a minute later. "Your loyalty to Garrett Clayworth is commendable but misplaced. He is sinking his own ship and is prepared to drown everyone with him. There is another way, a better way, a way that ensures a future for the people you care about. Await instructions." The message was from Helios. Paul was terrified, but he was also a pragmatist. He had seen the madness in Garrett's eyes. He knew the ship was sinking. The anonymous message offered him a lifeboat. After a sleepless night, he replied with a single word: "Ready." Through Paul, Charlotte began to orchestrate the final act. She fed him key pieces of information to discreetly share with the wavering board members' projections, showing the true, catastrophic long-term cost of the aerodynamic deal, and subtle hints about Garrett's misuse of funds. She was turning Garrett's most trusted lieutenant into her unwilling double agent. Garrett, oblivious to the betrayal brewing in his own office, was consumed with finding his wife. His anger had morphed into a strange, desperate obsession. He hired a private investigator, a former NYPD detective with a sterling reputation, named Frank Miller. "Find her, Frank," Garrett ordered, pacing his penthouse. "She's not at her parents', not at her sister's, not with any of her friends. Her credit cards haven't been used. It's like she fell off the face of the earth." Miller was good at his job. Within 72 hours he found something. Not Charlotte herself, but her car. The nondescript Lexus sedan was parked in a long-term garage near Penn Station. The attendant remembered a woman matching her description, paying for a month in cash and then walking into the station. "It looks like she just left Mr. Clayworth," Miller reported. "Took a train, maybe. Bought a burner phone. She planned this." The news hit Garrett in a way he didn't expect. Charlotte hadn't just run away in a hysterical fit. She had disappeared. Methodically. Coldly. The realization was unsettling. It didn't align with the woman he thought he knew, the docile, predictable wife. For the first time, he felt a sliver of fear. Who was this woman he had been married to for a decade? That evening, as he sat alone in the vast, silent penthouse that Charlotte had decorated, he noticed something he'd never paid attention to before. On a bookshelf in her old reading nook was a row of books on arcane subjects, quantum computing, chaos theory, advanced cryptography. He'd always assumed they were for show part of the intellectual aesthetic she cultivated. He picked one up. It was heavily annotated in the margins, with neat, precise handwriting, filled with complex equations and notes he couldn't begin to comprehend. A cold dread washed over him. It was the feeling of a man who realizes he has been living with a stranger. A brilliant stranger. The final piece of Charlotte's psychological assault arrived the next morning. It was a simple, hand-delivered manila envelope addressed to Garrett. Inside there was no letter, no explanation. There was only one object, the Clayworth diamond, removed from its platinum setting. The magnificent stone felt cold and inert in his hand. It was a message clearer than any words. It said, "Our contract is broken. Your currency has no value here." At that exact moment, his office line buzzed. It was Paul. "Sir," he said, his voice strained. "The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They said your attendance is mandatory." Garrett knew. This was it. The coup. The final betrayal. They were coming for his crown. He gripped the loose diamond in his hand, his knuckles white. He was an emperor, cornered and alone in his crumbling palace, and he was about to face the rebellion he himself had caused, never once suspecting the invisible hand that had guided them all to this very moment. The Zenith Corps boardroom was on the 80th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary in the sky that offered a godlike view of Manhattan. It was Garrett's favorite room, a throne room where his word was law. Today it felt like a cage. The long mahogany table was full. The 10 members of his board were seated, their faces a mixture of grim resolve and nervous apprehension. They avoided his eyes as he entered. Paul stood by the head of the table, looking pale. He flinched when Garrett's gaze swept over him. "What is the meaning of this?" Garrett's voice was dangerously low, a rumble of controlled fury. "If this is about the Elysian offer, my answer is still no. We don't bow to corporate vultures." An older board member, a man named George, who had known Garrett's father, cleared his throat. "This is about more than that, Garrett. This is about your leadership. Your judgment." Garrett laughed, a harsh, grating sound. My judgment built this company from a $10 million firm into a $10 billion titan. Which one of you can say the same?" Before anyone could answer, the double doors to the boardroom opened again. Every head turned. Charlotte Clayworth walked into the room. She was not the ghost in Chanel from the gala. This was a woman they had never seen before. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, sharp and severe. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional chignon. Her face was devoid of the soft, placid expression they were used to. Instead, her eyes were focused and intense, holding an authority that was utterly arresting. She was flanked by 2 people, Mr. Davies looking every bit the unassuming lawyer, and a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who was clearly part of her legal team. Garrett stared, utterly dumbfounded. "Charlotte, what in God's name are you doing here? This is a private meeting." "I was invited," Charlotte said, her voice cool and steady, echoing slightly in the tense silence. She took a place at the opposite end of the table, directly facing him. It was a clear challenge. "Invited by who?" Garrett sputtered, looking around the table at the suddenly very still board members. "By us, Garrett," George said quietly. "Mrs. Clayworth presented us with some information. Information we could not ignore." Charlotte placed a slim, leather-bound portfolio on the table in front of her. "For the past 2 weeks, Garrett, you've been fighting a ghost. You've been looking for a corporate raider named Helios. You've been looking for your missing wife. It must be so inefficient looking for 2 people when they are in fact the same person." The shock in the room was a physical force. Garrett's face went from red with anger to white with disbelief. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The books on cryptography, the cold, methodical disappearance. It all slammed into him at once. "You," he stammered, unable to form the words. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Charlotte's voice was surgical. "Is it more impossible than you running a multi-billion-dollar company and never asking what the woman who shared your bed for 10 years did with her time? You saw what you wanted to see, a beautiful, simple accessory. You never bothered to look at the machinery inside." She nodded to Mr. Davies. He began to distribute folders to each board member. In those folders, Charlotte continued, her eyes locked on Garrett. "You will find a detailed accounting of Garrett's misuse of corporate funds, the private jet usage for non-business-related travel with Ms. Devereaux, the unapproved expenses, the consulting fees, paid to shell companies owned by his friends. It totals over $17 million in the last 3 years alone. A clear and prosecutable breach of his fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders." Garrett was on his feet now, his face contorted in a mask of rage. You snake! This is my company." "Is it?" Charlotte countered her voice, never rising. "According to the latest filings, you personally own 28% of Zenith Corp. A substantial amount, to be sure, but not a controlling interest." She opened her own portfolio. Elysian Ventures. "My primary holding company recently acquired a significant position in Zenith Corp through open market purchases during the stock's recent downturn. As of this morning, my firm owns 32% of Zenith Corp. I am now the majority shareholder." The silence was broken only by the sharp intake of breath from several board members. Garrett looked as if he had been physically struck. He sank back into his chair, his empire vaporizing before his very eyes. "And about the aerodynamic deal?" Charlotte went on, her tone utterly ruthless. "The deal is dead. My acquisition of Zenith stock gives me the power to veto it, which I have already done. We will pay the penalty fees from your personal severance package, of course. We willn't be acquiring a hollow company at a ridiculous premium. And Elysian Ventures, being a generous partner, will now license its proprietary technology to Zenith Corp at a very competitive rate. Because I, unlike you, Garrett, am interested in building this company up, not using it as a personal playground." She stood up, the undisputed center of power in the room. "The board has already held a preliminary vote. They are exercising the morality clause in your contract. You are being removed as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your personal effects from the office will be couriered to you. As for the penthouse, my lawyers will be in touch about that. It is, after all, a corporate asset." She looked down the length of the table at the broken man who had been her husband. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a cold, hard finality. "You publicly humiliated me and called me a placeholder," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "You were wrong. I was never the placeholder. I was the goddamn architect." Without another glance at him, Charlotte turned to the stunned board. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice ringing with newfound command, "my name is Charlotte Clayworth, and I am your new CEO. We have a lot of work to do." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The story of the boardroom execution became the stuff of Wall Street legend, whispered in steakhouse bars and exclusive country clubs. The tale of the silent, scorned wife, who was secretly a financial titan, a ghost in the machine named Helios, who staged a coup against her own billionaire husband, was more dramatic than any fiction. Garrett Clayworth, the emperor of Zenith Corp, was gone. He left the building that day, a diminished man, stripped of his company, his power and his dignity. The ensuing divorce was swift and brutal. Charlotte's legal team, armed with the evidence of his financial infidelities and corporate malfeasance, left him with only a fraction of his former fortune. He was still a wealthy man, but he was no longer a player. He was a cautionary tale. He retreated from public life, a king in exile, haunted by the ghost of the woman he had so fatally underestimated. Bianca Devereaux faded into obscurity even faster. With her reputation destroyed and her connections severed, she was last heard of working in a high-end art gallery in Miami, the irony lost on no one. Her 15 minutes of infamy were over. In the glass tower on the 80th floor, a new era began. Charlotte taking the helm as CEO of Zenith Corp was a revelation. Where Garrett was impulsive and driven by ego, Charlotte was strategic, analytical, and visionary. She didn't rule by fear. She led with a quiet, unshakable competence that commanded more respect than Garrett's bluster ever had. Her first act was to formally merge the most valuable assets of Elysian Ventures with Zenith Corp, creating a new tech conglomerate that was more powerful and innovative than ever before. She wasn't just his replacement, she was his upgrade. She poured resources into research, and development fostered a culture of collaboration and promoted talented women to executive positions they had been denied under Garrett's regime. The company, once a reflection of one man's ego, was transformed into a dynamic engine of progress. The stock, after a brief period of shock, soared to unprecedented heights. She sold the ostentatious Fifth Avenue penthouse and the canary yellow Clayworth diamond. The proceeds went into a new philanthropic foundation, the Helios Initiative, dedicated to funding STEM education for underprivileged young women. She had no interest in the trappings of Garrett's empire. She was busy building her own one, founded on merit and innovation, not arrogance and acquisition. Her office was not Garrett's old one. She had the entire floor redesigned, open spaces, clean lines, and living walls of green plants. It was a space for thinking, for creating. One evening, months after the takeover, Mr. Davies found her standing by the vast window, looking out at the sprawling tapestry of city lights. "Are you happy, Charlotte?" he asked, one of the few people who could ask her such a direct question. Charlotte considered it for a moment, her reflection a faint silhouette against the glittering skyline. "Happy is a complicated word," she replied, her voice softer than it was in the boardroom. "I didn't do this for happiness. I did this for balance. For 10 years, I let myself be defined by someone else. I made myself small to fit into his world. I am not small, Davies, and I will never make myself small again." She turned from the window, a small, genuine smile finally touching her lips. It was not the practiced, polite smile of the billionaire's wife, but the confident, authentic smile of a woman who was entirely her own. "I have my work," she said. "I have my purpose. I have my name back. And that," she concluded, looking out at the city that was now hers to conquer, "is more than enough." She was no longer Charlotte Clayworth, the wife. She was not even Helios, the myth. She was simply Charlotte, an architect of her own destiny, a woman who had walked through the fire of public humiliation and emerged not as a victim, but as the master of a new empire. That is the incredible story of Charlotte Clayworth, a woman the world had written off as a silent partner, a beautiful accessory to a powerful man. It serves as a powerful reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most dangerous. They are the observers, the listeners, the thinkers. While others are busy broadcasting their power, the quiet ones are busy building it in silence. Charlotte's journey wasn't simply about revenge, it was about reclamation. She reclaimed her name, her power, and her identity from a man who thought he owned them all. She proved that true strength isn't about being the loudest voice, but about having the most calculated plan and the courage to execute it when the time is right. If this story of incredible resilience and calculated justice resonated with you, show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next story, because there are always more secrets to uncover.